Welcome to Central Rocks. This is a program about geology, about the geology faculty here at Central Washington University. I'm your host, Nick Zentner. So this is our first show, so let's give you a little feeling for what the plan is. We're hoping to give you a feeling for who we have in the department and the kind of research that they're doing. I'm in the geology department as well, but I'm a teacher, not a researcher. So each week we hope to have somebody coming in talking about their research. Today we have our first guest, Charlie Rubin. Charlie was born and raised in New York City, went to school in Montana, University of Montana in Missoula, got degrees there, did some geology up in Alaska for a while, and then went to California Institute of Technology with a PhD. Charlie arrived in 1991 in Ellensburg. Charlie, can I shake your hand? Welcome to the program.
It's with pleasure, Nick.
How did you fit us into the schedule, Charlie? You're such a busy guy. Well, can we start a little bit with getting a feeling for why you're here? Why are you in Ellensburg, of all places?
Well, part of it is lifestyle. It's a great place to live. I like climbing. I like skiing, being out in the mountains. That's part of it. The other was we had the opportunity to build a really good department here at a small college where we can do things we couldn't normally do at a big place.
Great. Well, we appreciate you being here. You've got so many different kinds of research happening here. Charlie's been to Asia. He's been working on the San Andreas Fault in California, up in Alaska, Taiwan. It's all earthquake related. So perhaps we can take this first segment and talk about some of the work you've been doing in Sumatra. For the visitors and viewers that have short-term memories, December 26, 2004, there was a magnitude 9 earthquake that produced a tremendous tsunami that crossed the Indian Ocean. Hundreds of thousands of lives lost. And Charlie, you spent this past summer in Sumatra. Why did you pick to go there, and how did you get started on your work?
Well, usually for the earthquake studies, I'm interested in something interesting scientifically, but also interesting where I can work with people and kind of mitigate or help earthquake hazards in that local area.
Okay. So you heard about the tragedy. You must have some colleagues that work on tsunami-type deposits. So how did you know where to start? You had scouted out field locations, or were you working with a group that was already there?
Well, I had never been to Sumatra before. So a friend of mine, a colleague, called me from Caltech, and he and I had National Science Foundation funding to go to Sumatra after the earthquake to help kind of the U.S. post-earthquake response.
Okay. So if you're doing earthquake research in Sumatra after this tremendous tsunami, what kind of things are you looking for? Do you have some equipment involved, or is it just walking around making maps?
Well, we actually chose for this particular trip, rather than work where the earthquake took place, we worked to the south, because we're interested in where the next great earthquake might be.
Okay.
Because a lot of people live along the coast there. So we actually concentrated south of the December earthquake.
Okay. So if you're looking for evidence of, well, let's start with this. When the tsunami came in along the shores of Indonesia, was anything left? We know about the devastation, but was there any geologic record of that event, that wall of water?
Well, what you'll see is a sheet of sand all through the whole area that post-tsunami. So to the south, we're looking for these kind of buried sand sheets that represent prehistoric tsunamis.
So you have a tsunami, which is a wall of water generated from an earthquake, and the deposit is this layer of sand. And so if you're looking for ancient earthquakes, you're looking for a bunch of different sand layers in the subsurface?
That's right.
So do you dig a hole, or how do you find those layers of sand?
A couple of things. During the coast, it's kind of vegetation on the coast.
Okay.
And then you'll have a thin sand layer deposit on top during a tsunami. Then more vegetation kind of covers that. So we go to areas that might preserve these deposits, and we use equipment kind of like that gouge core.
We just happen to have a gouge core right here, Charlie. So can you show us kind of how this works?
Little T.
Sure.
So what we do is we kind of attach this simple device together.
All right.
It's not real rocket science.
Well, look at that.
There we go. And then we'll take this gouge core, excuse me.
It's okay.
And we'll just kind of push this down into the beach area of silts and peats. And eventually we'll pull this out of the ground, and there'll be a core, a continuous core, and there might be little sand layers in that core that might represent tsunamis.
Is it normally a sandy area, or is it usually muddy, and so when you find a sand layer, you've got to explain that somehow?
That's right. We're working, say, in these quiet water lagoons that are just very still water with mud depositing and kind of organic muck.
Okay.
So the little sand layers, the only way sand to get in there is from either big storms or tsunamis.
Did you find any sand layers, Charlie?
We found sand layers.
And who's the we, by the way?
Okay, I was there with myself. I brought a grad student with me, Grant Logston, CW
Okay.
grad student.
All right.
I brought a geologist colleague from the Bay Area. I had 3 or 4 Indonesian geologists with me, working with me.
Huh.
And
Had they ever looked at this kind of stuff before?
nope, first time anyone's ever looked for this in Sumatra, or Indonesia for that matter.
Wow. And this was a good, let's see, you were there in June of 2005?
That's right.
And the earthquake happened in December of 2004, so you're dealing with people that experienced this trauma, or this was a place that didn't quite get the full brunt of the tsunami in December?
Didn't get the full brunt of it, but the people really knew what was going on. All the local people came out and asked us questions in Indonesian, and my colleagues answered them, and we visited houses, and I asked, say, a grandmother who's been there for 70 years, has this ever happened in your lifetime or your parents' lifetime? So the locals are really interested.
And you were received positively? You were like, why are you here? Or they were interested, but they were also happy that you were there to do the work?
Interested, happy, very curious. We had little kids follow us and help us every day. You know, I'll help you take the core out of the ground.
Right, right.
So
that was one main central student that was with you that's going to get a master's project out of this.
that's right.
You must be thinking about going back. What do you hope to get in the future?
Sure. What we're going to try to do is apply for National Science Foundation funding. And if I get funded, I'll bring another grad student back, I'll bring Grant back, and probably a few undergrads.
Now, you and the National Science Foundation go way back, don't you, Charlie? You've really been able to harness some money from these folks over the years. What's the secret to getting this money, Charlie?
Well, there's no secret. They've supported my work for a long time. And in part, people are interested in earthquakes. And what I do is kind of a little cottage industry of looking at prehistoric earthquakes. And everybody's interested in how big they are and how big they might be.
But you've never done this kind of earthquake work before. You've been on the San Andreas, you've been up in Alaska, which we're going to talk about in a couple of minutes down the road. They're kind of using your track record here, perhaps, saying this is an earthquake guy that knows what he's doing, we're going to give him some money.
That's right. I haven't worked on tsunami deposits before, so it's a new thing to learn. But yeah, with a track record, they're more than open to go to different places.
Sure. And this is, I understand, not just you and some students and some Indonesian geologists, but there's the media that also happens to be there, Charlie, including the BBC and Discovery. How did they show up? How did they know you guys were doing the work?
You know, Nick, after the earthquake, it was a big thing. So Time Asia actually flew someone to Sri Lanka to get there right after the waves hit India, and then they came back to Sumatra. So they were doing, both Time Asia, BBC, and Discovery were doing a long special. When they heard we were there, they came back to film us because they were interested in prehistoric tsunamis. It was a good part of their story.
Okay, good. So is there any connection with the stuff that you might be learning in Southeast Asia with earthquake hazards that are happening here, perhaps up in the Northwest?
Sure, that's one of the reasons we go. We're interested in what giant earthquakes, how that would affect the Pacific coast of the Northwest. So we're looking at tsunami deposits in Sumatra, what we learn there, we'll come back and work here in the Northwest.
Have we had an earthquake like they experienced in Sumatra here in the Northwest?
Yep, the last time was January in 1700, a long time ago.
But that plate tectonic activity happening down there, happening here as well, so we may be facing something like that here in the Northwest.
Similar size earthquake, that's correct.
Okay, good. Well, I appreciate that knowledge sharing from you, Charlie. And I think after the break, we're probably going to talk about some of the teaching that you do here at Central as well.
That'll be fun.
Okay, excellent. Well, for you channel surfers out there, we're talking with Charlie Rubin from the Department of Geological Sciences at Central Washington University. Charlie, we've talked about the research that you do, at least one project you've done recently. But you teach also, don't you, Charlie?
Yep, I certainly do.
And one of your most well-known classes is a field course taught down in Eastern California. Now, why would you take Central Washington students all the way down to Eastern California?
Nick, this is right up with the Sierra Nevada mountains. I mean, people from Germany come here for vacations. It's an awesome place for geology.
And what's the nearest town to this place?
Bishop, California, and maybe Mammoth Lakes, the ski area.
Okay. You go down there because it's gorgeous. There's gorgeous places up here, so there's also maybe some geology down there that doesn't exist up here in Eastern Washington?
That's right. In Eastern Washington, it's mostly basalt. There are beautiful mountains to 14,000 feet high, glaciers, granites. They're just great things to look at.
So what time of the year do you do this? How many students do you take, and what's their level?
Well, we go right before the beginning of fall quarter because we want 2 weeks of intensive geology mapping. So we want no other distractions.
Okay.
Take about 25 to 26, 27 students.
And what level are they?
All introductory students. The only class they need is a Geology 101 or equivalent class. We don't want advanced students.
Now, why would you do that? It would seem like you'd want to wait till they had a bunch of geology background before you went out and did some stuff in the field. What's the advantage of taking them so early, Charlie?
Well, geology has field classes for advanced students to beginning students. We like having students straight out of the intro class so they get a feeling of what geology is about.
So there's some social benefits as well, I assume, if these are brand new kids to geology, maybe some not even sure they want to major in geology, and all of a sudden they're with people like themselves. Are there some social connections that continue?
It's great. One, they get to know each other really well. They're living with each other in dorms, eating together for 2 weeks every day. I'm with them every day. So we get to know each other very well. So there's this great camaraderie or esprit de corps they have through their whole major.
Good. So about 2 weeks, so you get them down to Eastern California. I mean, are you just driving around pointing out stuff, or you lecturing to them? What's the purpose of the class?
No, it's a class to learn how to make geologic maps. So they're out in the field working every day doing this, and the reports we do are the kind they might do if they were a professional geologist. And we kind of step up the difficulty as they get better at this. So it's not a lecture class, and it's not a field trip. They're actually working in the field as a geologist.
So let's expand on working in the field. So they must be hiking around a little bit. There's some physical activity as well. And what are they turning in? What are you grading?
Well, they're hiking around. They're learning how to work with other students. They have partners. They're turning in maps, geologic maps, cross-sections, reports, explanations. The same thing they'd be doing if they were working for an engineering consulting firm.
So they know none of this before they go down. They're from an introductory class, so they've heard a few of these terms and that sort of thing. But they're seeing this in context, in a natural context for the first time?
That's right. And if you do something every day for 2 weeks, you really get to understand it much better than you have a lecture once a week for 9 weeks.
So do you have some experience in this area? How did you know how to start? The field sites, the level of complexity? You don't want to get them in some dangerous physical spots. So how did you put this course together?
Well, part of it was based on a class some of us TA'd as graduate students at Stanford. And Stanford at one point had this incredible program in Owens Valley for intro students. Only one class required, and we decided to work with Stanford and to expand it and have Central have a class down there too.
Okay. So you kind of modeled after Stanford's course that already existed there then?
That's right.
So this is like a theme now. From our first segment, we've got people from pretty high-powered places and then Central Washington University. And here we are, students from Stanford, which is a pretty respected Pac-10 school with a geology program that's real strong, and Central kids. Does this strike anybody as weird, or people now view Central as equals to some of these places geologically?
It works great. The students certainly interact and have a great time together. I mean, and then for us it's great because we've kind of arrived finally at Central. So now we have graduate students who want to come and get a master's degree. They actually want to come here because they realize it's one of the better programs in the Western United States.
So 2 weeks in the field, do you then follow up with anything here at Central, or is it the whole course just down there for 2 weeks?
Nick, they take 4 credits.
Yeah.
It's all done when they get in the van and come back here. I have a little grading to do, but it's in the bag for them.
So I would guess if you are working with these students day in and day out and you're eating together and this sort of thing, that you'll see them the rest of their time at Central, are there other benefits like other courses that you teach you can relate to Geology 210 or letters of recommendation? Are these some things that you can follow through on?
Actually, all of it. I get to know them so well. I can write really good recommendations and be very honest because I know them very well.
Right.
It's not like I have them for an hour in a class.
Sure.
I have them in my later advanced classes. I know them. We can joke around with each other. I can use examples from the field, and everyone understands it.
And that Sumatra research you were just talking about last segment, there's some students typically written into these grants, and so do you use that Bishop class, that Geology California class, as almost like a screening tool to find some students that you can take on some of these projects?
Yeah, I guess in part I do. I watch how students work every day, not just how smart they are, how easy they get along. How do they work when they're stressed out? How do they work when they're tired and thirsty? Because Sumatra's a long way away. You want to make sure you get along with everyone really well.
Well, I think it's pretty unique. You know, I'm from the geology department as well, Charlie. We actually know each other, don't we, Charlie?
Quite well.
Yes, okay, good. So I think it's pretty bizarre that you can be an introductory geology student one September, and then if you're strong enough in the field, the next summer you are on the other side of the world doing work with you or some of our other folks. Jeannie Ackerman is one case of this, where she was at Bishop one September, and where did she go the following summer?
Taiwan.
And what was she doing similar kind of earthquake work that you were talking about in Sumatra?
Similar work, but not tsunamis, looking at large magnitude earthquakes within the interior of Taiwan. But it's a great opportunity. So students early in their undergraduate career can come and do research on kind of world-class problems that they'll normally never get to do as an undergrad.
Nice. Are there other field courses then in the program? This is just a 2-week introductory field course, but there must be some other field components as well.
I mean, a lot of our classes have labs that are in the field. My structure trip has field labs as well as some Saturday trips. And we end the class with kind of a culmination of a more advanced summer mapping class.
6-week thing?
6 week we do with Oregon State.
Okay.
And actually our students do really well because not many other schools have this type of class, so our students do very well in these classes.
Well, thank you for sharing about that course. Just parenthetically, you do some other teaching as well. Give us a feel for some of the other courses that you teach regularly in the department besides this field course.
I teach a 101 class regularly. I teach structural geology, an advanced class that covers kind of faulting and folding and earthquakes. And I teach a class on earthquakes alone. And I also teach a class on snow sciences and avalanches, which is pretty fun at Snoqualmie Pass.
Up at the pass,
That's
really?
right, at Alpental.
So you teach the geology of the pass, or you talk about snow? What's the...
It's kind of like, it's a class of talking about snow and how snow fails as avalanches. So we actually go and describe snow like we would sediments from earthquakes. And when we describe snow every week, we go up to Alpental and describe snow and eventually try to learn how to forecast avalanches better.
Well, there's another field class, I guess.
That's right. And that's a totally field class. That's
Wonderful.
right.
Well, thanks for sharing that. I think after the break, we'll get back to some of your research, okay?
It'll be fun.
How about more research this time? We talked about Sumatra, we talked about your teaching. Up in Alaska, you had a rather quick departure from Ellensburg, Washington, if I recall, to get up to Denali. Can you set the stage for that, please?
Sure. In November 2002, there was a large magnitude earthquake in the Denali Fault. I heard about it, I think, on a Tuesday night, and a friend from Alaska called and CNN called, too, and asked me about it. I know nothing about it. And then 2 days later, I left, canceled my structure class for a week.
So this is Denali Fault, near Denali National Park?
It goes through Denali Park all the way, actually, into Canada. Yeah, so it's in the high part of the Alaska Range.
And it has produced many earthquakes in the past, or this was a surprise?
Well, this is a surprise, the first earthquake in historic time.
Okay. Magnitude 7...
9.
7.9.
7.9, almost a magnitude 8.
So you get these calls, and it's Tuesday, and you say, I got to get up there. you got money? NSF is fine with you just jetting up there?
Well, before I did it up there, I made a phone call first.
Uh-huh.
I said, you know, I really like to go up there. This is the kind of funds I needed. They asked me to write a one-page letter detailing what I wanted to do, and then got tickets, and I went with some colleagues and some Central students later on with me to Alaska. That's right.
You call NSF and say, this is Charlie Rubin on the phone. I want money now, and they say sure.
Not quite. I say, hi, this is Charlie. You know, I think NSF we need to do a response from this earthquake. This is the plan I want to have, and I go and do it. That's
All right. Well, you're big time, Charlie. You're big time. So you get up there. How do you even know where to go, first of all? Did you get some helicopters lined up? Do you have workers with you? How's that work?
I had to, within a few days, I had to line up a helicopter pilot, contractor, a mechanic, places to stay, rental cars. It took a lot of work to get up there. And then we knew where the earthquake occurred from the seismologists, so we just got in a helicopter and started flying.
So you're the first geologist on the scene.
Actually, there was another geologist, the USGS in Anchorage, was on the scene, and Peter and I knew each other as grad students. So Peter and I talked before I went up.
Nice. So you had a sense of what this fault was like because you had done a lot of work on the San Andreas Fault, and there are similar faults?
That's right.
So what was the purpose of your visit? What were you hoping to document?
Well, one, it was the largest earthquake on a strike-slip fault, where the earth moves laterally to one another in the last over 100 years.
This is a big plate boundary between two plates?
Behind the plate boundary.
Okay.
But it's a large, very large earthquake, and one, we wanted to use the Denali fault as a kind of a comparison to perhaps future ruptures on the San Andreas Fault.
Okay. So what are you trying to measure and document?
Sure. There we did a few things. One, we wanted to get what the offsets were in 2002.
What does offset mean?
How much the Earth has moved.
Okay.
So maybe there was this movement of, say, 10 feet. Maybe the movement was 20 or 30 feet.
Okay.
We needed to see how much movement there was along that fault.
And so how do you determine that? You try to find something that is on opposite sides of the fault that used to be together?
That's right. A stream that went straight across the creek then becomes displaced, and it has a big dog leg in it.
And were there streams, or were there other linear features that you could use?
Streams, glacial moraines. Where it actually were roads, we used offset roads. The roads were displaced.
And this is out in the boonies. This is remote stuff?
That's right, but we also used the Trans-Alaska Pipeline was offset.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
The pipeline itself was broken?
The pipeline didn't break. It was designed for this fault. Geologists actually work with Alaska, and the offsets there were maybe 15 to 18 feet, and the pipeline did not rupture.
Huh. So to measure offset, I imagine, you know, just taking out a measuring tape along the trend of the fault, but you weren't doing that because the offsets were more than the length of one measuring tape.
Well, actually, we had a big measuring tape.
Did you?
And in the winter, this is November, in the Alaska Range, there wasn't much daylight. We had a helicopter, so we did some quick measurements just to get it.
Okay.
And then we went back the following summer using, you know, a total station with these cool prisms to get precise offsets, you know, to the centimeter level.
Well, let's talk about that. I've heard that phrase total station for a long time, and I've never figured out what the heck it is. So can you describe the simple mechanics of a total station?
Sure. It's a precise surveying device, the kind you see the DOT use on roads, but we have even a more precise machine that uses a laser, and it fires a laser from the machine to the prism and back, and it gives a precise location of where that is on the ground.
So the prism's on the other side of the fault.
That's right.
Okay. So you've got a grad student or two that's up there helping you out.
We had a couple of grad students from Central. We had a grad student from Caltech.
Okay.
All working together.
All right. And what were the offset measurements that you came up with? Do you recall?
Sure. Actually, the maximum offset was in meters, almost 9 meters.
9 meters of movement at the snap of a finger.
Snap of a finger, which is one of the largest strike-slip offsets, certainly in the last 100 years, that we've documented globally.
Compare that to the offset of the Northridge earthquake in 1994. Was there a similar strike-slip offset there?
Different kind of fault, but there you're talking about just
point.
Meters of offset. I mean, a few meters at most.
So typical offset in Southern California along San Andreas is a couple of meters.
Probably the average is 3.5 meters.
Okay.
There are places where there's 8 to 9 meter offsets. And you know, people kind of looked at it and said, that seems like a lot. And here we can show in Alaska that actually does happen.
Right. So even though 9 meters is large along these kinds of faults, and it did happen in what would you say, November of 2002?
That's right.
Were there any loss of lives? Was this remote enough that it didn't damage any structures, that sort of thing?
Luckily, it was very remote, so there wasn't really a lot of property damage. There was some loss of life, but the Trans-Alaska Pipeline crossed this fault, and the actual pipeline was shut down for a few days. Oh. And the United States gets much of its petroleum reserves from Prudhoe Bay.
So this is work in Alaska, this is work in California along earthquakes, but you're an earthquake geologist in the Pacific Northwest. Maybe you can give us a little feeling for if these kinds of earthquakes, strike-slip earthquakes, are possible in Washington, and if they're not, what's maybe more of an earthquake threat?
I think in Washington, you have two plates that are kind of coming together, colliding.
Okay.
And from that, you're getting similar earthquakes that we would have in Sumatra. And we also have similar earthquakes that you can get in Los Angeles along what's called reverse faults.
Okay.
One block moves up. And that fault actually goes right through kind of South Seattle, near the Kingdom.
The Seattle Fault,
That's
perhaps,
right.
Charlie.
That's right.
That got a lot of press about 10 years ago, the Seattle Fault. It was first discovered then.
That's right.
Before the 1990s, were many of these faults known in the Pacific Northwest?
They weren't recognized, and I think now with better technology of using what's called LiDAR imagery, we can see faults through the forest.
Wow. So would you have a guess for how many faults have been mapped in the Puget Sound area by now? Is it hundreds, or is
No, there's probably a few handful of active faults, and every few years we learn of a new one.
Right. If you were willing to go out on a limb, perhaps, Charlie, if there was a magnitude 6 earthquake happening in the Northwest in the future, would it be more likely to be along a Seattle Fault type structure, or would it be more one of these trench-related guys that would be more than a magnitude 6? Do we have an idea of the frequency of some of these?
We have an idea of the frequency a little bit. The faults within Seattle, you can have a magnitude 7 or perhaps larger, which would be a large earthquake near a metropolitan area. The faults that are offshore Washington, that can generate a magnitude 8 or 9 earthquake. It's farther from Seattle, but very large earthquake.
And any real concern for major earthquakes in Kittitas Valley?
It's a big unknown. We haven't had any earthquakes, large ones, historic, but we do have these beautiful ridges, like Menashes Ridge, you know, Yakima Ridge, and those actually develop from earthquakes.
So might there be a chance of a major earthquake on this side of the mountains? Can't rule it out?
Can't rule it out. I'm not saying major, but
Right.
certainly I can certainly think of magnitude 6 or 6.5 without a problem.
Are there faults on this side of the mountains that a person like, I don't know, you might work with to get a little better feeling for frequency levels? Are you too busy now in Sumatra?
No, I would love to work in Washington. The problem in central Washington is a lot of the faults are buried. You don't really see them on the surface, so they're much harder to work with.
What's the closest fault to this studio here on Central Washington's campus?
Probably the fault under Menashes Ridge.
Right at the base of Menashes there's a fault?
Well, probably
there?
under it, and it probably projects under Kittitas Valley, actually.
Charlie, you are shaking people's psyche here a little bit at home. There's perhaps a fault that projects beneath this studio.
Perhaps.
Yes, okay, good. Well, thank you for sharing all of your wonderful knowledge with us, Charlie. It's a pleasure working with you. And I hope you come back and do this sometime soon.
It's been fun, Nick.
Okay, great. There it is, folks. We're hoping to do more of these shows, and perhaps we'll have another faculty member from the Department of Geological Sciences here on the campus of Central Washington University sometime soon. Thank you for watching. Have a pleasant evening.